The city that bore Stalin's name was supposed to be unbreakable, a symbol of Soviet strength. Factories, smokestacks, and endless rows of workers' housing along the Volga River. But in the summer of 1942, Stalingrad became something else. A place where the world itself seemed to catch fire. When the first German bombs fell, Yevdokia Nikolaeva was tending a wounded child in the small clinic of her neighborhood. She had no uniform, no weapon, only a red armband marked with a fading cross. Outside, the sky thundered. Inside, the windows shattered. She pressed her body over the child and whispered, "Stay still, little one, it will pass." It didn't. The city burned for months. Hospitals vanished under rubble. Medical supplies ran out within weeks. Doctors were drafted or killed, leaving women like Yevdokia to improvise operations in basements and cellars. Her hospital became a dark hole beneath what was once a theater. The walls trembled every few minutes. The air smelled of smoke, blood, and disinfectant made from vodka. Each morning she crossed the ruined streets with a stretcher team. 4 women carrying the wounded from the front lines. They wrapped rags around their boots to keep quiet, stepping over bodies, glass, and ash. Shells screamed above them, but they didn't run. There was nowhere to run to. At night, she wrote on scraps of newspaper. Another day. The city breathes smoke. We have no gauze left, no morphine, but we keep going. The soldiers began to call her Mama Dushya when they saw her appear through the smoke, small, pale, carrying a tin of iodine and a calm voice. They knew help had come. She spoke little. Her presence was enough. Sometimes she would sing while dressing wounds, old folk songs from her village. The men said it made them forget the pain for a while. And that was all she wanted, to make the pain stop, even if only for a moment. One night in November, a shell hit the theater above their shelter. The ceiling collapsed, burying 2 patients alive. The lights went out. She groped through the dust, calling their names. Her hands found only bricks, blood, and silence. She did not cry. She simply kept digging. When they found her hours later, she was still there, covered in soot, coughing but alive. Beside her lay the 2 bodies. She had closed their eyes and placed a small icon on each chest. The next morning she resumed her rounds. There was no distinction between soldiers and civilians now. Children arrived with shrapnel wounds. Old men carried broken rifles, insisting they could still fight. She treated them all. The river froze in December. Crossing it meant death. And yet Yevdokia went every few nights, rowing across in darkness to bring medical supplies from the far bank. Sometimes she returned with bread, sometimes with letters. Once she brought back a cat because she said the men needed something warm to hold. Her own family was gone. Her husband, a factory worker, had been killed in the first air raid. Her son was missing somewhere on the front, but she never spoke of it. Grief in Stalingrad was a private thing. The winter was the cruelest the city had ever known. Temperatures fell to 30 below. The wounded froze before they could reach shelter. Yevdokia tore her own coat into bandages and burned furniture to boil water. When all else failed, she used her hands, pressing wounds shut, whispering prayers she barely remembered. In January, word spread that the German 6th Army was trapped. The city had become a graveyard for invaders. But for Yevdokia, victory meant little. The wounded still came. The dying still called her name. One evening, as she tended to a young German soldier, barely 16 years old, one of her comrades asked, "Why help him? He came to kill us." She paused, then said quietly, "He's someone's child, and someone's child should not die alone." The war had stripped away nations, uniforms, ideologies. What remained were human faces, broken, frightened, and needing touch. When the Red Army finally declared Stalingrad liberated, Yevdokia was still at her post. She weighed less than 90 pounds. Her hands were raw from frostbite. but she refused to leave the makeshift hospital until every patient was evacuated. Reporters came months later asking for her story. She said only, "I did what anyone would do. The city fought with rifles. I fought with my hands." And then she returned to work, helping to rebuild the hospital. The war had taken everything from her: home, family, peace. But it could not take her purpose, because some people are born to destroy, and others to heal what destruction leaves behind. The siege did not end when the guns fell silent. For Yevdokia, the quiet after the battle was worse than the noise. The city no longer roared, it whispered. Snow covered the ruins of factories, theaters, and homes. The river lay frozen, a silver scar running through the ashes. Everywhere there were ghosts, men calling out for mothers who would never answer, women searching for faces they would never see again. And in the middle of it all, Yevdokia kept walking, her boots tied with wire, her pockets filled with scraps of cloth. Each morning she climbed from her shelter and looked at the horizon, as if expecting her son to appear. He never did, but she kept a plate ready for him anyway. The hospital she rebuilt was little more than a cellar with a stove. Its walls were lined with frost and soot. She and a handful of surviving nurses treated frostbite, starvation, and despair. The war had changed its face, from bombs to hunger, from fire to silence. In February, the German soldiers surrendered. Tens of thousands marched through the streets of the city they had tried to erase. Yevdokia watched them pass. Some limped, some stumbled. She didn't cheer, she didn't curse them. She only thought of the 16-year-old boy she had nursed weeks before, and wondered if his mother had ever known. At night, she sat by the stove, writing again on bits of packaging paper. "Today, a boy brought me a frozen loaf of bread. He said it was from his father's rations. We boiled it into soup. It tasted like hope." That word, hope, became her medicine. She used it when bandages ran out. She shared it when morphine was gone. She whispered it into the ears of those who no longer believed in tomorrow. The spring thaw revealed the cost of survival. Bodies emerged from the ice, faceless, countless. The stench returned before the flowers did. Yevdokia joined burial teams, wrapping what remained of the fallen. Each time she murmured a prayer. It didn't matter whose side they had been on. To her, they were all simply human. When the front moved west, she stayed behind. Her superiors offered transfer, Moscow, Leningrad, anywhere, but she refused. "This city needs hands," she said, "and mine still work." In the years that followed, she became a legend without realizing it. Young nurses would come to learn from her. They called her Comrade Yevdokia, though most simply said Mama. Her methods were simple. Boil everything, save every thread, listen to every cry. But what they remembered most was her calm. Even in the worst days, she never raised her voice. One of her students years later recalled, "When I asked her how she survived Stalingrad, she said, 'I didn't. I lived through it, but a part of me stayed there.'" The state tried to honor her. They sent medals, certificates, portraits. She hid them in a drawer. What she kept on her wall was a single photograph, not of generals or parades, but of her patients, smiling faces, men who had once been broken and were somehow still alive. She never remarried. She never found her son, but she found a new family among those she healed. In 1953, when the war had already become a memory for most, Yevdokia was invited to speak at a medical congress in Moscow. She wore her old uniform, patched, faded, still smelling faintly of antiseptic and smoke. When asked about her greatest achievement, she paused for a long time, then said quietly, "I learned that kindness can survive anything, even Stalingrad." The hall went silent. No applause. Just silence. The kind that means everyone understands. Years later, when she passed away in her sleep, her belongings were few. A notebook filled with shaky handwriting, a box of letters never sent, and a small tin cross. In the notebook's final entry, written just days before her death, she had written, "I used to think survival was a miracle. Now I know. Compassion is." They buried her not far from the ruins of the theatre where she once worked. No grand ceremony. Only a handful of nurses, some veterans, and the sound of the river flowing again. Today, tourists walk through the rebuilt streets of Volgograd, the new name for the old city. They see statues, museums, memorials. But somewhere, deep in the archives, a photograph still remains, a small woman with tired eyes, bandaging a soldier's arm in a room lit by a single candle. No one remembers her voice, but they remember her touch. In every life she saved, every wound she closed, every act of mercy she refused to abandon. And that, more than any victory, is what endures. Because when the guns fall silent and the flags are folded, it's not the soldiers or the leaders who rebuild the world. It's the healers, the quiet ones, the ones like Yevdokia Nikolaeva, who fought the greatest battle of all and never carried a weapon.